I often describe Bitcoin and most cryptocurrencies as having no value, distinguishing the utility of Bitcoin from the price at which it trades. But there is a very common rebuttal to that point of view. Bitcoin has value as a store of value. Despite being extremely flawed circular logic, which could apply to just about anything on Earth in the right conditions, I'll bite. Let's pretend it makes sense. If Bitcoin has value because it's a store of value, that implies basically 100% of its value proposition is security and liquidity. The fact that you know when you put Bitcoin in your wallet, you are confident nobody else will move it out, and you know when you intend to use it, you will be able to spend with at least the same purchasing power as you stored. If Bitcoin is used to store value, you still need some other currency for daily transactions, which means without a mechanism to safely, quickly, and easily exchange your Bitcoin between them, it's back to being useless. And the crypto world doesn't exactly have a good track record for achieving any of these three things. Crypto is filled with scams, corruption, fraud, and surprise bankruptcies. Bitcoin in particular is not highly performant compared to alternatives even in crypto, and it's still extremely tricky, confusing, and scary for ordinary people to use. Even crypto veterans often get a little anxious every time they hit send on a transaction because it may be the last time they see their funds. If you make a mistake, there is no customer service department to help you. Transactions are permanent and irreversible. The more decentralized you go, the less security risk you will be exposed to, but the more responsibility you will bear not to make mistakes. Regardless, none of that really matters, because the checkmate argument here is also the most obvious. You are hostage to incredibly unpredictable pricing. If your goal is to use Bitcoin as a store of value, Bitcoin's price volatility has to be a major strike against it. You simply can't project with confidence even approximately what your store can be traded for when you intend to use it. For most people, that alone is a deal breaker and simply not worth the trouble when alternatives exist. If I'm looking to store value, I'm not looking for speculative bets on unrealized promises of a future that may never materialize. I just want to get my money back when I need it. That's the number one most basic requirement of a store of value, and Bitcoin can't even meet that. So why are we even talking about it being a reserve currency? It's hard to imagine anyone taking Bitcoin seriously as a store of value or reserve currency until or unless the wild volatility of the past is tamed. I will ignore the problems with centralized custodial wallets for most of this argument because that makes it too easy. Let's assume you are very careful and store your Bitcoin in cold storage and nobody has your private key except you. Here's the problem. Keeping your funds secure isn't actually your responsibility. Your funds aren't stored in your wallet. Your funds are just data written to the blockchain. If the blockchain is compromised, it doesn't matter how securely you store your private key. Well, that's no problem because the Bitcoin blockchain in particular is exceptionally secure, right? Yes, it is. But it's also exceptionally expensive to maintain. Security is provided by miners, and the Bitcoin protocol is deliberately expensive to operate because the more expensive it is to mine, the more unlikely it will be that someone can achieve 51% of network capacity and impose their own transactions on the network, i.e., steal your money without the key. For Bitcoin to be secure, you actually want mining to be expensive. The more expensive, the more secure. And because its miners are the security and it's so expensive to be a miner, we really need to care a lot about how they earn income and whether their business model is sustainable. Mining income comes from two sources: rewards for mining new blocks and transaction fees. Getting rewards for mining new blocks is great, but the reward is in Bitcoin, which means miners need to sell it to pay their bills, which means somebody needs to buy it. The obvious implication here is that without a continuous stream of new dollars, this source is unreliable. And if the continuous stream of new dollars doesn't materialize for long enough that miners run out of cash and credit, the price of Bitcoin will collapse because supply growth is hard-coded into the protocol and utility bills must be paid now. Regardless, the problem with rewards is that they won't last forever. Remember the 21 million Bitcoin cap? Rewards actually get halved every few years. That means if the price of Bitcoin doesn't go up every few years, security cannot be guaranteed by rewards. And the price of Bitcoin today is less than it was 5 years ago. In any case, it doesn't really matter because eventually there will be zero new Bitcoin rewards and this revenue stream will disappear entirely. When the purpose of Bitcoin was to be a currency, it was plausible, without thinking about it too carefully, that an income stream from transaction fees could be sufficient to sustain the network. That's how Visa is funded, after all. But even ignoring how much bigger the Bitcoin network is than Visa and how much more expensive it is to run, if the purpose of Bitcoin is to literally do nothing with it, just hodl forever, that source of funding doesn't make much sense, does it? How can anyone trust transaction fees to be stable and sufficient in the long term for a global scale reserve currency if the purpose of that reserve currency is for it not to be used in most transactions? But that's an academic argument anyway, because Bitcoin can't technically scale. It has a hard theoretical cap of about 7 transactions per second. That means the success of Bitcoin will be its downfall. Miners can't grow revenue by increasing transaction volume, so their only release valve to stay in business is raising transaction fees. Who cares how secure the network becomes if I have to pay hundreds or thousands of dollars to actually use it? I hear somebody screaming Lightning Network, but that has its own flaws and security considerations. Regardless, with or without the Lightning Network, the base Layer 1 network still needs miners, or nothing you build on top of it will matter. And Lightning just isn't a major factor today. Basing your point of view on yet another unrealized tech is speculation. Nobody can predict the future. We can only discuss the facts that exist right now. Here are the facts. Price volatility alone is a deal breaker for most. If you can't get volatility under control, none of these other 9 facts even matter, and Bitcoin will never be a good store of value. It can be other things, but a reserve currency won't be one of them. A large liquid market is required. Without exchanges, Bitcoin is useless. Supply is predictable, demand is not. Supply is growing now, but it won't forever. In any case, without a continuous stream of new money, it all falls apart. Bitcoin rewards will slowly disappear. One of the key selling features of Bitcoin is the 21 million hard supply cap, but countries abandon deflationary currencies for a reason. Don't let ideology interfere with your perception of reality. Store of value as a primary use case means less transactions. Transaction volume is limited technically anyway. Bitcoin is not even the best cryptocurrency. Fewer transactions means sky-high fees as rewards disappear. Bills need to be paid. If transaction volumes can't scale, transaction fees must, or there will be no way for miners to pay their power bills. Security is linked to mining costs. More expensive, the better. Given the existence of cheaper alternatives and all the other things humanity could be doing with that energy, is it even worth it? Centralized custodian wallets are not trustworthy. If these companies need to become regulated like banks to become trustworthy, why don't you just use a bank? They already exist. Decentralized alternatives are scary. Without reintroducing intermediaries, I don't know how this problem gets fixed. There are only so many user experience improvements you can make to simplify complicated financial transactions. Some people just don't want that much responsibility. Layer 2 networks are speculative and unrealized. We can revisit Layer 2 networks in a future video. The value of anything always needs to be gauged after comparing it to alternatives. What part of this looks like an attractive, sustainable, long-term, trustworthy store of value suitable for a global reserve currency? It's important not to confuse what you want to be true with what is true. I'm willing to bet many proponents of Bitcoin as a reserve currency like the idea more than the reality, and are continuously forced to make excuses for how terrible this ecosystem has evolved. The current reserve currency system is flawed, therefore people are looking for an alternative. Therefore, if Bitcoin proponents claim it can be an alternative and use fancy words I barely understand, they must be right, is not a compelling argument. But that's what most of these arguments sound like to me. Agreeing on the problem doesn't mean you must agree on the solution. Separate these two things in your mind. Nobody can predict the future, but at some point, even Bitcoin maxis have to start looking elsewhere. If you found this content helpful, please consider liking the video and subscribing to my channel. It really does help get this channel more exposure and keep me motivated to produce more content.